We witnessed this firsthand during the pandemic as people stormed supermarkets to hoard loo roll. Like, I'm good for a year, but fuck the rest of you. Okay, controversial opinions coming up, but here we go. Are there people in the world who are inherently evil? And is it even possible to quantify what good or evil is? I'm not denying that people cause harm and suffering to each other, but how much of that can really be placed on the shoulders of an individual, and how much is a product of our environment and our history? Is it even possible to break this cycle of hurt and blame? Or at least, what is the most empowering perspective that we can find to guide us in our dark times? Now, my starting point when I was trying to unpack all of this was when I started to really pay attention to how polarised so much of modern society is. Like, everything is being made so black and white, often pitting traits against each other that are completely unrelated. Like, with people on both sides believing that they are right and just and the others are wrong. And it seems to me that it's all just a matter of perspective and the way that we see the world, which is largely a result of the systems and organisations and the environment that we just happen to have been exposed to. I came across this quote from Paul the Apostle, and it said, "Put on the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." It's really interesting that Paul describes spiritual wickedness as coming from principalities and powers in high places, and he also suggests that the devil is not found in flesh and blood. So what does he mean by this? Something I've been trying to get a hold on for a long time is the way that an organised group seems to have a mind of its own, independent of any one individual, like a hive mind, if you will. And in that respect, I don't think it's unfair to compare the principalities, kingdoms, empires of old to modern corporations. Any organisation creates a system built on a set of rules and expectations that will naturally push behaviour and outcomes towards certain goals. These ideals can absolutely be intended for the greater good, but very often the desire to achieve these goals and the motivation to prioritise the system above all else can lead people to compromise their values and cause harm to others. Let me give you an example of that. A company launches a product that is wildly successful, and the company grows, they launch on a stock market, they have shareholders, everyone's making loads of money, and suddenly new information comes to light that proves that the product is in fact harmful. And if this information gets out, the company will undoubtedly go bankrupt and the investors are going to lose millions. So they keep selling it. Every member of staff is just doing their job, their own little sliver, doing what they need to do to take their paycheck so they can look after their family. They don't want to hurt anyone, but they have kids to feed and bills to pay, and they can't risk losing their job right now. Now, these people aren't inherently evil. They're all looking out for their loved ones, but the system has created a situation where they are willing to compromise on their values because they're afraid of what they will lose. When you go higher up the organisation, the directors or the shareholders, we perceive them as more evil because of their apparent awareness and the more money involved. And there seems to be a lot more at stake, but fundamentally, they are behaving in exactly the same way, compromising their values because of what they fear to lose. Everyone, from the top down, is afraid that they won't have enough. And we're all guilty of this, prioritising our own needs over the common good. It's necessary to an extent for our survival, but the system we're playing in capitalises on this primitive human behaviour and seemingly exploits it to have us chasing things that we really don't need. We can think of these systems in much the same way as people think of evil spirits. They're these huge, intangible beings that have intention and, to some extent, a mind of their own. They don't have the physical capability to cause harm, but it's very possible that they can create situations that encourage people to betray what they stand for. And this sounds rather like the devil on your shoulder, don't you think? And you can see how this has played out in Nazi Germany or communist Russia or even the fall of the Roman Empire, where people compromised on their values little by little for their own self-interest, and it all stacked up into unimaginable horrors. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, where he describes the atrocities of communist Russia and its hard labour camps in Siberia, said, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart." And what I take that to mean is we cannot look outside of ourselves and identify any group, organisation or individual as being fundamentally evil. We all have the capacity to do truly horrifying things if circumstances aligned. Like if it came to the crunch, most of us would betray a casual acquaintance if it meant saving ourselves or our loved ones from torture and death, just as ordinary people did to their neighbours in Russia. There was a slow, insidious creep to get to that stage, but this is what happens when we elevate allegiance to a system above staying true to our values, or you might say when we worship false idols. We can look at the whole system of capitalism as possibly the biggest of these false idols today. The way the system is organised leads us to believe that more is always better, that we should constantly be striving to collect more resources, more money. But it's never enough. There's no finish line. We can look at so many of the super rich who are still unsatisfied and panicking about the future. And I can't blame them, because that's the system that we have built over centuries seems to suggest. And if you couple that with the fact that so many highly successful people are driven by the need to prove themselves worthy to overcome the pain they've suffered in the past, these people are driven to hoard for themselves because they subconsciously still don't trust that they are safe and people aren't out to get them. You don't need to look at many of our modern day politicians to see this. It's obvious to me that so many of them have sought power to overcome their own feelings of powerlessness or inadequacy. But when people act from a place of fear in this way, it can never be satiated because it's unquantifiable. Every system has the possibility of abuse for personal gain or a sense of control, but a desire for control is simultaneously an admission that you don't feel in control, which is why people can never get enough, and it's not sustainable. R. Buckminster Fuller, the American architect, systems theorist, writer, designer, inventor, philosopher and futurist, fair play, back in the 70s, he said that there was already more than enough resources, food, materials for the whole world to live quite comfortably, but he believed it would take around another 50 years for humanity to start to unlearn our ways and begin to change. We witnessed this firsthand during the pandemic as people stormed supermarkets to hoard loo roll. Like, I'm good for a year, but fuck the rest of you. Like, we're all terrified that things will run out. But, you know, it's estimated that there's enough food in circulation at any one time to feed the whole world and still have another 50% excess. And yet millions around the world continue to die from hunger each year. It's insanity. But the shift that we need to make is an individual shift. Our systems and organisations are self-perpetuating and they won't stop until they crash and burn. And anyone who has achieved success and amassed wealth is probably not going to just let go of their hard-earned fruits of their labour. And I understand that. Our way out is to stop playing by the same rules. We each need to work on shifting our own perspective from a place of lack, of fear of not having enough, to a place of trust that there's plenty for everyone and an understanding of what constitutes enough for us. Now, the system is pretty great at keeping us in the loop. Like, I still buy things I don't need more than I'd like, but it's about trying to be that little bit more conscious of the motivations and drivers of our actions. Like, why are we working 80 hours a week? What specifically are we reaching for? Are the things that we're buying really making our lives any better? Are they sustainable, rejuvenating? Like, is it worth sacrificing time with our family? And underpinning all of this is our values. Like, we live in a largely underdeveloped society, and we're stuck in this eternal youth stage of self-gratification. When we're young, life is about self-discovery, experience everything we can, finding out who we are and what the world can do for us. Many traditional cultures still conduct rites of passage that signify the transition into adulthood, the moment at which each individual takes up their responsibilities for the community. In Western culture, we've lost these rites, and with it, we've lost the shift in perspective that signifies a move into adulthood. The moment when we're meant to shift our values from the external, material possessions and experiences, to intrinsic values of how we wish to show up, how we will contribute and look after those around us. Now, this is where meaning in life is found, in how we can make things better for everyone. And the reason so many people are depressed and disillusioned, addicted, causing harm, is because we've lost touch with that. People can't find meaning and purpose because we're still looking for it outside of ourselves. Lynne's razor states, "Never assume malice when incompetence will suffice as an explanation." And I'd like to add to that we also so often hurt people inadvertently while protecting our own wounds. I don't believe people are inherently evil, but we are all walking around with buried pain that is compounded over generations that can lead us to harming others when trying to protect ourselves, or because we've been hurt or let down too many times in the past. We all have that capacity within us. Couple that with our systems and our organisations that encourage people to compromise their values unaware in order to fulfil their role or to protect and provide for themselves and their loved ones. There might always be evil in the world, but I don't ascribe it to specific humans. Many of us have our identities so tied up in our work, our suffering, or our desire for personal gain, that we might never be able to see the part of us that is perfectly good without any of that. The most recent understanding of shame and grief and trauma tells us about how the pain of these conditions can distort the psyche and cause people to project and punish others because they are unable to bear the weight of their own wounds. These wounds influence the story our egos unconsciously tell us about the world, and they will do whatever it takes to protect that belief. When we're locked in a trauma response, our minds become trapped at the age we were when we first experienced an analogous pain. When someone gets close to one of our shame wounds, we psychologically revert to that stage of development, and we are completely incapable of remaining a functional adult in those moments. So often the people who hurt us are incapable of seeing how they are hurting us because they are acting on instinct like this, like a wounded animal for self-preservation. And I would argue that a lot of the most apparently evil people we meet in the world have been so badly hurt in the past that this becomes a permanent state where they are so overwhelmed by their suffering that their subconscious drives them to offload their pain onto others. If you have been let down by people enough times, I can easily see how you could end up believing that it's you alone against the world. Like, if that's your perspective, how could you even trust anyone to try and heal you? If you blame the world for everything and behave in a way that gets you rejected, it validates your perspective. Don't get me wrong, I still think it's necessary to punish or take action against people who commit acts of violence, but that doesn't have to be independent of trying to find compassion for another fucked up human battling their demons just like the rest of us. There's an African proverb that states, "The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down just to feel its warmth." And when we look at it like this, it becomes apparent to me that every action we take is either coming from a place of love or is in some form a bid for love. Like, we are either acting with positive intention for the good of others, or we are taking more and more drastic measures to try and get the love and attention we feel we are lacking. So why am I saying all this, and why am I making excuses for people who can cause so much harm? Because the only way we can release the buried shame and the trauma that keeps us stuck is by sitting and witnessing people as they share their deepest and their most vulnerable pain, and being able to stay present without judgment or trying to fix, and still accepting each other as the flawed humans we all are. Like, we're all doing the best we can with the cards that we've been dealt. We need to continue to be committed to doing the work to heal as much of our own pain so that we can stop projecting it onto others and be able to stand in the fire of their wounds without being triggered ourselves and then inadvertently biting back as well. Like when our partner is unwittingly projecting their blame onto us that was caused by their parents or their past, we need to find the strength to stand there, see it for what it is, and allow them the space to work through it. Just think how your relationships would change if you were able to see all of your moments of conflict as bids for love rather than personal attacks. Like, arguments arise because we don't feel seen or appreciated or even considered. It doesn't mean we won't express our anger, but it can inform how we do so. Like, adopting the belief that these are all bids for love as our default perspective will bring us closer than ever to our loved ones. Now, I fully believe this to be fundamentally true, no matter how extreme someone's behaviour might be, but I also realise that some people have a lot more pain and trauma than they might ever be able to unpack, and they can continue to take it out on those around them. If people are out to harm us, we can still protect ourselves, fight back, remove ourselves from dangerous situations, while at the same time having compassion for yet another damaged human who is suffering just like the rest of us, quite possibly more so if they are driven to hurt. It concerns me how black and white people see situations like this. Striving to have compassion and forgiveness towards people who hurt us frees us from holding on to anger and resentment that keeps us stuck, and it also releases the tension and judgment that perpetuates the self-view and the world view of our persecutors. And I know this is easier said than done, but the only way to heal is to accept each other as we are, with all our pain and the actions that manifest from that. Like, do what you need to do to protect yourself from dangerous situations, but we need to try to not judge people who are swimming in their own pain and grief, who have no capacity to act any differently than they do. And it's going to take baby steps. When I've spoken to people about this, it's been suggested that collecting material wealth is an inbuilt human trait, like the need for survival, right? Creating security through access to materials. Now, there might be some truth in that to an extent, but it's also evident that humans gathered in tribes and communities specifically because it increased their chances of survival. If you look at the remaining remote tribes in Africa or in the Amazon, like, their societies are commonly built upon sharing everything they have with each other. My mothers will even breastfeed each other's children. Everyone in the village uses their unique skills, the hunter, the medicine woman, the weaver, or whatever, and they offer them for the good of the tribe. That's not to say they don't have arguments, but even those are largely dealt with as a community, accepting the guilty party and reminding them of their strengths and their contribution. In her wonderful book, The Soul of Money, Lynne said, "Chronic hunger isn't nature's way of limiting population or improving the species. In fact, it is less about nature and more about flawed government, politics, and economic systems of our own construction. The idea that scarcity and competition are just the way it is no longer even viable science." Respected evolutionary biologist Elizabeth Sartorius notes that nature fosters collaboration and reciprocity. Competition in nature exists, she says, but it has its limits, and the true law of survival is ultimately cooperation. Nature expresses itself in balance and purpose. Nature thrives in sufficiency. A lion kills what it needs to maintain itself, and no more than that. A healthy lion doesn't go on killing rampages. It wants and takes only enough. Different species of plants and animals coexist, each providing something essential to a balanced environment that supports all life. It seems evident to me that we have largely lost the connectedness of community, and with it the confidence to take only what we need and offer up everything we can for the greater good. This act of giving, knowing our role to play in the tribe, is what provides meaning and purpose that is so necessary to give us fulfilling lives. Anything in isolation is meaningless, and we need the context of its relationship to others to help us understand the meaning. It's the interconnectivity, the relationship that creates our world, And we need to come back into alignment with our deeper cultural values so we can find the balance point to maintain sustainability. The system of nature is constantly self-correcting, and if we can't find a way to achieve equilibrium for ourselves, sooner or later, nature will do it for us. That's it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, make sure you leave a comment and hit that subscribe button. Quite a heavy topic today, but the core message is that I believe it's going to take individual effort from each of us to identify and live in alignment with our core values and for the greater good, so that we can start seeing real change. We've got our work cut out against the capitalism juggernaut, but we can all do our best to lead by example. If you feel like you need help to get clear on your own values and what you stand for, right now I'm offering free 45-minute coaching sessions for anyone who needs a little help getting back on track. I'll drop some info about that in the description. Thanks again, and I will see you soon.